Hello friends, welcome back for the 12th and final of these weekly videos introducing one aspect or other of our biblical languages learning. And today we're going to be focusing on the infinitive form of the verb and the participle form of the verb, and that will round out our consideration of the other major forms of the verbs. As always, we're not going to be trying to learn and master and memorize all the different forms, but we do want to understand the function of the infinitive and the function of the participle, so that when we're told by the Accordance Bible software that a particular verb is an infinitive or a participle or whatever, we can actually understand the significance of that information. So we had an introduction to the verbs a couple of weeks ago now. Then we looked at time and aspect and how that's expressed through the different tenses. Last week we introduced the idea of the various moods: the indicative, the imperative, the subjunctive, as well as the infinitive and the participle, and of course voice, active, middle and passive. And this week we're going to be looking at infinitives and participles and kind of round out that top level survey that we have been doing. So as always, we start with the English side of it, so that if we can understand how these forms function in our own language, that might help us make more sense of how they're functioning in Hebrew or Greek. So let's look at the infinitive first. The base form of the infinitive is just the simplest form of a verb, like eat, walk, drink, talk, etc. And no changes are being made at that point for tense, for number, or for person. It's simply the most basic, simple form of the verb. We often find it written in the form with to in front of it. To plus the base form is kind of the regular form of the infinitive when it's being used in language. To walk, to be, to see, to learn, etc. The bare infinitive, just the base form of it, without the to, can also be used. So what are you wanting to do? In various contexts, the answer can just be the bare infinitive without the preposition to. So an infinitive is not a finite verb, hence infinitive, meaning it can't be, which has the consequence at least, that it can't be the main verb of a sentence. A sentence must have a finite verb with a particular subject, etc. The infinitive doesn't have a subject, and it doesn't, we'll see that it's just not, it doesn't reflect a kind of a condition that we normally put on the verb in the different regular finite forms of the verb, whether that be in the indicative or the imperative or subjunctive, etc. So you can't use an infinitive as the main verb of a sentence, and it kind of answers the question such as what kind or for what reason, to walk, to drive, etc. would be the answer. So in the biblical Hebrew there are two forms of the infinitive. There's the infinitive as a construct, and there's a separate kind of independent form or absolute form of the infinitive. We'll look at it briefly. Again, this is not detailed information you need to learn. It's simply information to fill in the background, so you have a sense of how important a particular feature of the language may be. So in the case of the construct infinitive, it occurs more than 6,500 times in the Hebrew Bible. It's not inflected for person, number, or gender. It can be part of a construct chain. It can also have a pronominal suffix at the end. And at the beginning, it can take the prefix le, k, or b. Kind of difficult thing to translate into English, but the basic idea, it expresses intention, purpose, and result. So there's an example here coming out of Genesis, where we've got the verb havdil, havdil, which as the instant details are telling us, it's a verb. It's a hifal form of the verb. That's not surprising given there's a het on the front and the long hirik yod I sound towards the end. And then it says infinitive construct, and it's in the absolute form. It's not part of a construct phrase, and so its meaning is to be separated or to separate oneself, but because it's hifal, it has the sense of cause to separate or to separate, to push apart, whatever. Okay, so the software is going to tell us what it is. We have to have enough of an understanding of the tense or the binyan and so on to be able to make sense of that information. When we're looking at the absolute infinitive as distinct from the infinitive when it occurs in the construct shape and is kind of compressed a little bit, it occurs fewer than 1,000 times, has a slightly different formation. It's likely to have the long O between the second and the third letters. Again, it's not inflected as you'd expect, being infinitive. It's not inflected for person, number, and gender. It can't be part of a construct chain. It always stands alone. And it never has a pronominal suffix, and it never has the prepositions attached to the front. There's virtually no equivalent to this in English. It's a form used for emphasis or to stress duplication, and it's just an unusual and distinctive form of the infinitive. So the infinitive construct that can be part of larger syntactical phrases, and the infinitive absolute, which is kind of adding emphasis and reinforcement to the sense of the verb. So here we have an example, again, that's from Genesis, but Genesis chapter 2, the verse where Adam is told that he can eat freely of the trees in the garden, and akol it's a cow form. It's the infinitive absolute, and it has just simply the sense of the way it's being used next to the verb for eat is that you can eat and eat. You can eat freely without any hesitation. Okay, now when we switch across to New Testament, to the Greek, let's just do a bit of a scan of what we're working with. So the infinitive occurs across a large number of different verbs, but the verb to be is the one which occurs most often. 128 times it's going to be the verb to be, a whole lot of others, and then there's a huge number that only occur once or twice. In terms of tense, the infinitive is more likely to be aorist, slightly less likely to be present, and most unlikely to be perfect or future. So it's almost always going to have the aorist or the present sense. Okay, the undefined simple form of the action, or an ongoing continuing form of the action. And in terms of voice, 3/4 of the time infinitives are going to be active, and then way back. Middle is a poor second, and passive is a distant third. Okay. So when we're looking at the infinitive in New Testament Greek, it occurs just over 2,000 times, almost 2,300 times. So again, that's about 10% of the words in the Greek New Testament. We've already mentioned the most common verbs which you'll find in the infinitive are eimi, poieo, lego, ginomai, and erchomai. And just as an aside, pistuo, I believe, only occurs in the infinitive 12 times. Its tense is more likely to be aorist and present, as we've seen. Its voice is more likely to be middle. And the forms are going to look something like this. Luain, lusai, and if it's a second aorist, it'll have a different stem, and therefore it has the same ending as the present. And in a middle form, not that it's going to occur that often, luesthai and lusasthai, okay? But luain and lusai are the two common forms of the verb in the infinitive that you're going to see. So looking at those, to take an example, here's the beginning of the birth narrative in Matthew's Gospel, and I've simply, I had done a search looking for infinitives in the Greek New Testament, and as I scrolled down through the results, starting with Matthew's Gospel, here was a passage which has 4 infinitives in the text for us. 2 of them that end with the ein, epsilon, iota, nu, and 2 of them, as you can see, that end with sigma, alpha, iota. And so the natural response is to think that the first 2 ending in ein are present infinitives, while the other 2 are aorist infinitives. But in fact, as it happens, they're all aorist infinitives. So we'll talk a little bit about that in class on Wednesday night. Okay, sunelthein is an aorist active infinitive, and the compound verb there is sun erchomai. And paralabain is again a compound verb, paralambano, and again it's an aorist active infinitive, not present as we might have thought. Whereas on the other hand, as anticipated, these other 2 examples, degmatisai and apolusai, they're both easily recognized as aorist infinitives. Now you don't need to know that or be able to parse it yourself, provided when the instant details come up you can go, aha, I know what's going on here, and I know how to apply that information to the translation and the interpretation of the text. So that's enough on infinitives for our purposes. Let's switch focus to participles. Again, starting in English, participle is a verb form that functions as an adjective, but which can also be used to form verb tenses. So the present participle in English, you typically add ing to the base verb. So walk becomes walking. Okay. The way it gets used to express a continuous verb tense. I'm walking to the store. Okay, that participle. As an adjective, the crying baby has a wet diaper, and crying there is an adjective for the noun baby. Alright. Past participle, we simply you typically add ed to the end of the base form, and there are obviously some verbs where that doesn't apply, and they're not consistent. They simply have to be memorized, like written, sung, drunk, etc. Thought. And a similar kind of usage to form a perfect verb tense. I have finished my homework. Okay, so it's a participial phrase. I have finished my homework in English. Or to form the passive voice. The broken window, so again it's an adjectival kind of sense. The broken window was repaired. Actually, it was repaired is the past participle there. Okay. All right, so let's have a look at how this might work out in Biblical Hebrew, where participles occur more than 8,400 times. And there's a whole lot of detailed linguistic information here that we simply don't need to learn, because our focus is when the software tells us this is a participle, what does that mean in terms of the making sense of the passage. So they're built from the verb stem. They imply action, but the focus of a participle is on the participant, not on the action. Okay. They can be active or passive. They may even have a direct object if they're active. They do have adjectival features, so they're going to reflect gender, number and state. They can be determined or undetermined, in other words with the article, without the article, or determined in some other way. They can take a pronominal suffix and function as a noun even. When they're functioning as an adjective, they can occur like any other adjective in the attributive sense, in the predicative sense, or as a substantive. Okay, and you may want to revisit our earlier work on adjectives at that point. And so the simple active form is going to be kotel, using our standard Hebrew demo verb, katal. So it becomes kotel, and they will be inflected for both gender and number. So kotel would be masculine singular, kotlim masculine plural, and so on. Okay. So again, we're going to rely on the software, and we've actually had an example of this from when we first started looking at the opening verses of Genesis chapter 1, where we have this word which here it's being, in the NRSV, it's translated as swept. This is a PL participle, and you notice that it's feminine and it's singular and it's absolute. It's not in a construct form, and it's a normal in meaning would be to shake, and it's the PL, so it's an intensified form of shake. It's sometimes translated as hovered. In the NRSV, it's translated as swept. Again, our translation will be partly informed by the individual words, partly informed by our understanding of the whole passage. So if we think that Ruach Elohim means a spirit of God, or God's spirit is hovering or sweeping over the water, we'll translate it in perhaps a more gentle way. If, as I do, you think that Ruach Elohim means a mighty storm, then swept or hovering may be too gentle a way of interpreting it. Okay. So I might say brewing, for example, as a way of picking up the PL. All right, with New Testament Greek, again, occurs very often. The most common form is going to be the a participle form of Lego, I say, and we'll have a look at one of those in a moment. But there are a number of other cases. More than half of the time they're going to be present participles. About a third of the time they'll be aorist, and the remainder they'll be perfect participles. When it comes to voice, over almost 3/4 of the time the participles are going to be active. About 1/4 of the time they'll be middle, and the remainder are passive. So that gives us a bit of a sense of the frequency data. So in the instance of participles in the Greek New Testament, they occur 6,658 times. So given there's only 23,000 or so words in the New Testament, participles are very common. So I've said the most common one is lego, I say, echo, I have, eimi, I am, erchomai, I come or go, and ginomai, I become, or yeah, I am but I become. Pistuo, again looking at that because it's a theologically loaded word for us, only occurs as a participle 77 times, and without looking up the data, I'm guessing many of those will be a phrase like the believers, the ones who believing. Okay, hoi pistuantes, for example. So it's going to occur, as we've seen, aorist, present, and perfect. Most of the time it's going to be active, and about 1/4 of the time it's going to be middle. So let's think about how this is going to look. So remember, one of the things about the participle, as we saw in Hebrew as well, is that it is it's inflected like a noun or an adjective. So it's inflected for gender. So we have luon in the present active form. We have luon, luusa, and luon, and then they're the nominative singular forms, and then we have accusative, genitive, dative, singular, and plural, of course. In the aorist, same thing, but it's going to have that distinctive sigma alpha thumbprint for the aorist. The second aorist is going to use a different form of the verb stem, and for that reason it could simply use the present personal endings. And the perfect is going to have the duplication on the front. It's going to have the distinctive kappa as a marker of the perfect, and again it's in masculine, feminine, neuter forms, nominative, accusative, genitive, dative, singular, plural, all the way through. Okay, so the middle and passive forms, they'll be recognizable, but we are simply going to rely on the software to tell us what's going on. Okay, and the endings that are being used there are endings that we would be familiar with from the third declension, but the software is going to sort that out for us. So let's come back to our demo passage from Matthew chapter 1, talking about the conception of Jesus and Mary's pregnancy. Did a similar thing. I simply did a search on accordance for the participle form of the verb in New Testament Greek, and I started working through the results, and I realized that we could actually use the same passage because there are quite a number of participles in that one passage from Matthew chapter 1. That's a reminder that these are very common forms in biblical Greek. So to start off, just to pick a couple out for comment, the first one I'm highlighting is the the participle form of the verb to be. And you might remember last week I mentioned in passing that one of the things about the verb to be in the participle form is that they simply take the endings and there's no verb stem involved. So own is going to be present participle, masculine, singular, nominative. So So going back to the whole phrase, Yosef der ha'aner altes, and Joseph, her husband, her man, her husband, dikaios own, being just, being righteous, and then we have kai me thelon altain, and so on, and not wishing, not wishing. And so that's in fact, thelon is the next example of a participle. Again, it's Joseph is the subject, so it's going to be masculine. It's still nominative singular. Notice this time we've got the stem of the verb thelo, just with the masculine nominative singular present active participle added. Okay, so and we've got may in front of it, because may is the form of the negative used outside of the indicative mood. Again, we mentioned that last week. U or uk is the negative form in the indicative. When we get to imperatives and subjunctive and participles, then it becomes may. A little bit counterintuitive that may is the word for no. Okay. Another example, lego, and I mentioned before, lego is the most common verb to occur as a participle, and we would translate that as saying. Okay, said to him, saying, and or appeared to him, saying. So again, we're getting the form that's in the text, lego. We're getting the lexical form, lego. We're being told it's a verb, it's present tense, it's active voice, it's participle, and it's masculine singular nominative. And its general meaning is to say or to speak. So again, we've got to translate that into English that's going to work for us in the translation that picks up all the details. So the NRSV has used said. For our initial translation, I'd be suggesting we say saying. Okay, saying. All right, so that's our little walk through the infinitive and the participle forms of the verbs. We'll unpack this a little bit more in class on Wednesday night. The really important thing is to become comfortable and skilled in using the instant details or the parsing information or the interlinear tool to notice what you're being told about the parsing of the word, and then to be able to apply that information to the gloss, to the basic sense of the word, to come up with the actual nuanced translation of that particular word in that particular context. So during this week, give a bit more thought to infinitives and participles. Do your final preparation for the week 12 quiz, which will be open from 9 p.m. on Wednesday, not today, 9 p.m. on Wednesday until Friday at midnight. Best way to do that actually is to be going over the weekly exercises, particularly for weeks 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and looking at the vocab from those last 6 weeks as well. Reminder that for the students in the BTH, the final assessment item will be a 2-hour online quiz on the 12th of November. And for the MDiv students, the translation exercise will also be due at that same date. Okay? So, I hope that's been helpful, and I look forward to seeing you in class on Wednesday.